Throughout our 120 years, Ford has supported our nation's armed forces and honored their selfless service to our country. The Central Ohio Ford dealers are proud to continue this tradition by investing in the work of the National Veterans Memorial and Museum in Columbus. Together, we want to share the veterans' heroic stories and introduce a grateful nation to the faces behind our forces. Please join us monthly to hear inspiring educational stories from our veterans who have gone above and beyond their call to defend freedom around the world. The National Veterans Memorial and Museum and your Central Ohio Ford dealers. Together, we will never forget.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining the latest virtual rally point at the National Veterans Memorial and Museum. My name is Lieutenant General Mike Ferreter, and I'm the President and CEO. Today, we want to take a moment to honor and remember those men and women who were at Pearl Harbor 80 years ago. As all of you know, December 7th, 1941 was a date that has lived in infamy. Like JFK's assassination or the terrorist attacks on September 11th, generations of Americans knew exactly where they were and what they were doing when they learned of the attacks of our naval forces in Hawaii. The attack changed everything. It plunged us into global war, unprecedented by its scope and scale and destruction. So how do we get there? In the summer of 1937, Imperial Japan invaded China. In 1938, they had several deadly clashes with the Soviet Union. 1938 and 1939 also saw Hitler's consolidation of power, armament, expansion, and ultimately the invasion of Poland. World War II officially starts in Europe on September 1st, 1939, but the United States stays out of the war. The United States grows concerned with Japanese intentions in Asia and the threat to U.S. territories in the Philippines. Because of those threats, trade sanctions and an embargo are implemented in the summer of 1940 to stop Japan's military aggression. Japanese naval forces begin training for the attack on Pearl Harbor. In mid-November 1941, Japanese naval forces depart Japan to attack. Then, at 07:55 Hawaiian time, December 7th, 1941, the first wave of Japanese aircraft begin the attack. The very next day, FDR delivers his famous speech to both houses of Congress, and the United States declares war on Japan. So now let's hear from three men who were there as they share their stories.
My ship was scheduled to play USS Arizona for a fleet football championship. And so we were instructed to put on our uniforms and carry our spikes and our helmet. One of our own guys there was calling down and says, the Japanese attack in Pearl Harbor. I thought, oh, come on, don't joke about something like that, because we'd been talking about whether we're getting a war with Japan. And that time the ship shuddered. Some of the guys that was close to the guns went to the guns, started shooting at the Japanese planes before the rest of us down below decks knew what was going on. General quarters went, all hands man your battle stage. You don't have to change clothes or anything. You go as is. And my job was the crow's nest, up at 70, 80 feet up in the air. To get up into the crow's nest itself, a little trap door. About this much, I had to pull myself through with all my padding on to get through, because the trapdoor wasn't wide enough for me to go straight up through there. By the time I got up there, planes were buzzing around there, buildings were burning there, ships were burning there, and just in a few minutes' time, it's like mass destruction. You don't have time to think about it. You just train to do what you're supposed to do, and my job was to look out. So binoculars were up. And I happened to look around there, and there was a plane coming in over the top of the building there, and I reported a plane coming in from that side there. So by the time it came over the top of the buildings, the guns were shooting at it, and they knocked it down. We lost 23 men that day. The bomb missed me by about 40 feet. Just a little touch of wind dropped right on me there. It's that close. It was the Arizona, sister ship of my ship. 1,177 died that day on it, including there the band and most of the ship's football team. It gets kind of personal there when you know some of the people there that weren't as fortunate as I was.
So when we got in Pearl Harbor, on the way back, they knew something was coming up because they darkened ship at night. No lights on topside at all, so they wouldn't see you, supposedly. And below decks, if you open a hatch, we had little red bulbs on the bulkheads. They were just red lights. You could see where you were going, but no white lights at all, exposed. If you open a hatch, there was no white light. And these manned all the machine guns coming back from Manila. That was 2 months before the war, so they knew the war was going to come, but they didn't know where. And then when we got back, it steamed about 25 knots, which is unusual for, usually it's 10 or 15 knots in your leisure, but 25 knots all the way back. Speed was at the utmost, so when we got in Pearl Harbor, everything seemed serene and peaceful, and they tied us up to a pier, what I think they call it the 1010 pier, and there was the Honolulu cruiser was inside of us, and on the other side was the cruiser San Francisco. We were tied up to the Honolulu, and then we went out to check something, I forget what it was, and they put us in the Navy Yard, and they had men on the mast putting in the radar. And the radar guys were working every day, and we used to shoot the breeze with them, and I became very friendly with one of them. He came from Dorchester. I knew of his area, but I didn't know him. And I used to go over to his house when I got a chance and sit down with him and his wife and the baby and have lunch and enjoyed myself. But we were on a strict routine from noon to midnight. You had to be back on the ship at midnight. You couldn't stay overnight in Hawaii. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know where. And I read books since then, and they had no idea what was going to happen. That's a lot of baloney. They knew exactly what was going to happen, but they didn't know where. Because when we left Manila, the ship was darkened completely, and that's unusual. To cruise in the Pacific with no lights, no nothing, and we were all by ourselves and at top speed. So they knew something was coming. And then December 7th, I had a date with a nurse in the Queens Hospital, and my friend Fitzy from Yonkers, New York, he had a date with the other. There was 2 nurses. So we were all set to go ashore, and got my dress whites on and everything else, and all of a sudden I talking to Ensign McConaughey. He was the ensign in charge of the deck that day and on duty. So I was talking to him, and I looked up, and there was a whole fleet of planes coming in over Diamond Head. And I looked at him, I says, "We're going to have another drill. Here comes the planes," because they used to drill us every other day. And then I looked at them, and they were just planes, a bunch of planes, and never gave it a second thought. Then all of a sudden, a few of them broke off and they dived towards the subbase, which was where I was standing. The subbase was to our right, which would be east. And they dove down close, and they were right off the water. And I said to myself, they're going to get, censored for stunt flying, which the Navy didn't like. And then I realized that they weren't our planes. And then they were like from here to that wall away from me, the first ones that dropped their torpedoes, right astern of our ship. And the first 3 of them dropped their torpedoes, and I looked and I said, Japanese planes. So Ensign McConaughey said to me, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, to see the red ball." And he said, "Okay, general quarters." So by then, the next 3 had come down and dropped torpedoes. So I started taking off, and the bugle calls are sounding, and they're going over the loudspeaker, "All men man your battle stations." And I'm headed up to the forecastle to turret 1, because that's where I was stationed. And all of a sudden, I hear the boom, boom, and wow, I looked over, and I think it was a West Virginia. The California was first, the West Virginia was second, and there was a battleship outside of it, and it rolled over. Now, the Oklahoma rolled over and sunk, and trapped all those guys inside. And then behind that, there was two more battleships. And then the Nevada was way down the other end of the creek. And all hell broke loose, and everywhere you looked, there was explosions.
So we figured out where we were. This one guy, I'm telling you, he was sharp. He says, we're caught underneath the bridge of this 5-inch broadside gun. He says, the barrel goes out through there. The buckler plates were put over there. The gun barrel was open to the outside of the ship. He says, all we've got to do is follow the gun barrel out. And in the size of the air pocket, we would be out of air in less than 2 hours, is what he figured. So he says, I'm going out and I'm showing you the way. It was dark. I'd never been so dark in my life. When you figure when you close your eyes, it's dark, yes. But when you open your eyes and it's still dark, and you can't see anything. So anyway, he took my hand and showed me how to get out. He says, I'm going now, good luck. I took the hand of that Marine and says, I'm following him, because I don't know what else to do. You come behind me. And I went through there, and as he said, we got through, followed the barrel up, and got to the outside. I could see the light trickling down through the water. And we swam up. I almost ran out of air before I got to the surface of the water, but I made it. And when we got to the surface of the water, when I got to the surface of the water, there was about almost a half an inch of black oil floating on the surface of the water. And I looked back, and all I could see was the hull of the Oklahoma laying there. When it capsized, one of her screws was sticking out of the water. And I looked at that, and I said, I don't want anything to do with that. I started swimming away from the ship, which was difficult when there's about a half-inch of oil in the water. But anyhow, that was lucky that there was some sailor had jumped in a whaleboat by himself, a 26-foot motor whaleboat, and started the engine and jumped back on the tiller. And he just set the thing to idle and just started going through the general area just looking for survivors. And he saw me and come over and jumped down and helped get me out of the water into the boat. And we steamed around there and got about 4 more guys. He headed for Ford Island then. There was a Naval Air Station there. And there was a dispensary and everything else over there, which would get us into dry land. Just about the time we got almost to the water, almost to the beach, there's a Japanese plane come down and strafed the boat, but luckily he wasn't a very good shot because he missed the boat altogether. And then we jumped off the boat and pushed the guy back off. He's going out to look for more survivors. So there was a big old sewage pipe that run from the air station off the island over to the main sewage plant at the Naval Station Pearl Harbor. And the darn thing was about 5 feet high. It's a great big, huge thing. And we had trouble getting over that thing because I was weak. I'd swallowed some of that black oil. And being banged around inside that ship like a tennis ball, it wasn't the best in the world. But we got over and we were running together over toward the dispensary. And it had a big red cross on it, so we knew where we were going. And we come down and got strafed again by a pilot. And I just fell down. I just rolled over on my back. And I looked up, and that guy couldn't have been over 200 feet in the air. And he was looking down. I could see the guy looking down at me, or at us, He didn't look any older than I was, and just grinning like mad. And that made me mad. And anyway, I got over to the dispensary, and it was just full. I had got a piece of shrapnel in my leg. I don't know, it was shrapnel from the bullets, or whether it was some of the tarmac that they covered the airstrips with. I went in the dispensary, and they dropped a small bomb right close to it, shattered a window, and I said, I'm not here, I'm gone. And I went over to the exchange cafeteria. There was a gal in there, waitress. She was probably a Navy dependent. And she says, "What's wrong, sailor?" And I said, "Well, I'm sick. I'm swallowed some of that black oil." So she got a bucket and some milk and took me over, set me in a chair. This is, "Now drink this milk." And I drink the milk, I throw it back up into the bucket. And that would, in the process, would get rid of a lot of that black oil that was in my stomach. And I must have drank a couple of quarts of milk. And it pretty well cleaned me out. And I think that lady really saved my life. Things were pretty vague after that.
And I was inside the gun turret, and I got my rangefinder out, and I could see the planes every once in a while going by, in my line of vision. And I said to myself, there's a lot happening. And then the gunnery officer in the turret was a Marine lieutenant. I can't even remember his name. Barrows, I think it was, Barrows. And he said, "I want volunteers to cut down the awnings, because in summertime in Hawaii it gets hot, and they stretched awnings from the sides of the turrets to the lifelines so you could walk around underneath. You wouldn't be out in the boiling sun all the time. And we used to sleep on deck because it was hot. And I had the job of cutting down the awnings, so there was a couple of us. The rangefinder operator recited all the ranges. I was taking them, and he was reciting them to the gunnery officer. And I looked outside, and I said, "I got to cut the awnings down." I got my Bowie knife. They just issued Bowie knives before that to all the Navy. And I went out and I started cutting rope. And all of a sudden I see pop, pop, pop coming through the awning, so I ducked under the turret. It's about this high off the deck, and it's about 8 feet deep, so I dove under there, and the bullets tore up the deck, the wooden deck right near me. And then when that went by, I got back out and I started cutting more awnings, and finally I got all the awnings cut off the number 1 and number 2 turret. And then when the planes came in, I just ducked behind the big round thing on the bottom of the turret. They call it a barbette. I ducked behind that and watched the planes go by. A couple of them went by, they were burning, and you could see the pilots' faces. Another one went by, he's trailing gasoline out like crazy, and he wasn't on fire, but he was trailing gas all over the place. And our anti-aircraft guns were shooting at them, and they hit him before he got out of sight. And about maybe 2 hours later, after watching all the explosions on the battleships, and the Pennsylvania was in dry dock, and the 2 destroyers in front of her got hit. One of them got hit, and they were on cradles in the dry dock because they were painting the bottoms, and one fell over against the other. And then I saw the sister ship tied to a pier, and it was listing quite a bit, so it got hit. And we backed out about 11 o'clock in the morning, backed out of the slip on our own. Usually they have a tugboat pull you out, but it takes all that time to get the steam up. You have to light off the boilers and get the steam pressure up, so there's steam turbines. And by the time they got everything ready, it was 11 o'clock in the morning. And we backed out of our slip, and the battleship Nevada was coming by. And the Arizona blew up about that time, and it was a tremendous explosion. And then the Nevada was close, and when the Nevada went by, we were backing down to get behind it. So the Nevada went by, we pulled in behind it, and we had to wet down all the ammunition lockers on the starboard side because the heat was so intense from the Arizona. Excuse me. And then we proceeded to follow the Nevada out the channel. And as we're going out the channel, the Nevada got hit by 2 torpedoes. A 2-man sub in the channel launched torpedoes at the Nevada, and they hit it. And the bow was pretty well damaged, so they kicked it ahead all full, and you could see the sea boiling up. All ahead full, and they beached it. And they beached it right about the entrance to Hickam Field, where the planes come in, not the entrance actually, the plane entrance, you know, at the end of the runway. And it's near the city of Honolulu. So when the Nevada beached itself, we took right rudder and passed it. And the starboard side of our ship hit the reef, and it was bouncing. And I looked through the scopes in #1 turret. I could see the bow, and I see the water and everything in front of me, see what was going on. And I'm looking, and all of a sudden I see 2 trails coming down, so I screamed into the phones, torpedoes off the bow. One of them hit a reef in front of us, and the other went by us about 5 feet away, all the way. So I don't know where that one went. And then we got out of the channel, out into the open water, and there was a 2-man sub at Barbara's Point. And the gunnery crew on the #1 mount spotted it and fired at it and knocked the conning tower off it. And they couldn't submerge because it was shallow water. But they're the ones that fired the torpedo that hit the Nevada. So I don't know who fired ours. They were out in the ocean somewhere. And we cleared the channel anyway, and we went looking for the Japanese.
World War II is the deadliest war in the history of the world. Out of that destruction is born the Cold War. It also ushers in a Pax Americana, a period of relative peace and stability from 1945 to the present day. Let us not forget the service and sacrifice of the men and women who were present during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Those who lost their lives and those who carried their battle to the foes in the ensuing fight. They and their families were changed forever. And to all of you, as a reminder, despite our national designation, we are an unfunded nonprofit. We don't receive any funding from federal, state, or local governments. Our programming, like Rally Point, is made possible through the generous donations of our members, donors, and sponsors. So if you enjoyed this session, consider becoming a member or donating. Now, as we enter into the holiday season, it can be stressful on all of us. So reach out to our veterans and your friends, because sometimes a phone call or even a text message can make the connection stronger. Stay safe and healthy. Happy holidays, and hooah.
Throughout our 120 years, Ford has supported our nation's armed forces and honored their selfless service to our country. The Central Ohio Ford dealers are proud to continue this tradition by investing in the work of the National Veterans Memorial and Museum in Columbus. Together, we want to share the veterans' heroic stories and introduce a grateful nation to the faces behind our forces. Please join us monthly to hear inspiring educational stories from our veterans who have gone above and beyond their call to defend freedom around the world. The National Veterans Memorial and Museum and your Central Ohio Ford dealers. Together, we will never forget.